Hello, BookTube, and welcome to another weekly reading vlog. Well, I've got a bit of a book haul to report on this week, which means I'm going to be showing a lot of books to the camera, which means I should probably apologize for the fact that everything is going to be shown backwards, like this, in mirror image. I'm sorry, I don't know how to fix this. I have gone into the settings of this phone multiple times just to see if there's a way around it. I can't seem to fix it, so just bear with me. I'm going to be showing a lot of books, and they're all going to be backwards, so apologies in advance. All right, so I've got a bit of a book haul to report on this week, and it's somewhat a guilty book haul in that I spent maybe more money than I should have. There's actually a little bit of history to this. If you watch my video from last week, the weekly reading vlog from last week, and I'll try and remember to put a link to it in the description down below. I did mention actually that I had gone to a bookstore the previous week and had seen a lot of books that I wanted to buy but didn't because it seemed like a waste of money, and left the bookstore. But then, after having talked myself out of it and left the bookstore, I thought about it and I spent a couple nights and I thought, no, I really want those books. I really want those books. So these are at a bookstore downtown. I live in Ho Chi Minh City here in Vietnam. I've moved more to the outskirts of the city, but Fridays I'm back in the city center for work. So I went back to the same bookstore and I bought them. And part of the reason they cost so much is that they're comic books, or at least two of them are. So Marvel Epic Collection, Thor, War of the Gods, and Marvel Epic Collection, The Incredible Hulk, Crossroads. Now, these were the only two Epic collections that the store had. They did have other comic books there, but they were mostly kind of smaller collections, also newer collections. And you know, I'm older, so I have nostalgia for the old stuff. Actually, this is I think this is slightly before my time. War of the Gods is from the 70s, but you know, this was part of the culture when I was growing up. You know, in the comic book store, trying to figure out what the history of these characters were, etc. I was actually more of a DC fan when I was young, but I don't want to get into all of that. Point being, I saw these collections of Marvel comic books from the 70s and early 80s, which is an era I'm more familiar with. And I wanted them. You know, I gave myself all the reasons why I shouldn't be spending all that much money on it. Too old to be reading comic books now. I mean, I still am reading comic books now, but too old to be spending a lot of money on them. But I just was thinking this past week that it would be fun to read, and so I spent the money on it. I mean, yeah, the other reason I was reluctant to spend money on it is I'm from a school. I'm working at a school now, which has a library which has some comic books in it, and I can make use of the library. In fact, this Marvel Horror Lives Again collection, which I'm not even halfway through, which I got it at the school library. Seemed a little bit of a shame to spend my own money on it. But after I finish this one off, that will be all of the mainstream superhero comics that my library has that all have read and reviewed on this channel, until they order more. And it's not guaranteed that they'd order more necessarily. There are other comic books. There are Tintin, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, various other collections. But, you know, as an American, my nostalgia is for the superhero comics. So I wanted them. So now their comic books collections tend to be more expensive. This is $45 in the U.S., and this is $40 in the U.S. And I paid about their equivalent of that in Vietnamese dong. Although actually, given how the exchange rate, given how the dong has gotten a little bit weaker, I think I actually paid a little bit less than the cover price in Vietnamese dong once you run it through the exchange rate, which is surprising. Usually you pay a little bit more for the imports, but I don't know, maybe because they're older collections. So at any rate, that's $45 plus $40. So that's $85 right there. Then the other book that I talked myself out of last week, but then decided I did want after all, was Dune Messiah. Now, earlier this year, I read Dune. And after having finished Dune, I mean, I knew there were sequels, but this was like a massive book. This was like, not even including the appendices, this is like 800 pages. And I thought, I read it quickly, and I partially enjoyed it. There were things that tried my patience. I was curious to see where the story would go from here because I had heard that the tropes that get set up in Dune get subverted in the sequels. So I thought, well, that might be interesting to see how the tropes get subverted. But I don't want to read another 800-page book. But then I saw this. This is the first sequel to Dune. And you can see, let me hold these up here. I mean, it's not really comparable because one is thinner, but the other has wider margins. But you can see it's a slender volume. I knew this existed, but I didn't realize it was so much shorter. This is only 292 pages. Now, at the moment, the bookstore doesn't have any of the other sequels. But I thought, why don't I just grab this now rather than waiting a couple of years until the original story has faded in my head? It's not that long. This would be the perfect time to read it and see for myself whether I'm enjoying the sequels. I've heard some people, like Steve Donahue's channel, says that the sequels are really good. I've had other people tell me that Frank Herbert's writing style deteriorated, with each sequel, and Dune Messiah was worse than Dune, and they get worse with each subsequent book. But I guess I'll be making up my own mind about that. And then the other book I picked up was actually one I did not see last week, but something that I had been looking for a long time, which is The Song of Achilles. So I'm a big Greek mythology fan. I'm a big Trojan War fan. I've talked about this actually numerous times on this channel, but most recently when reviewing the Iliad last year. Now, that being said, I do tend to go in and out of phases with this. Like I'll read some books on Greek mythology, and then I'll go for a few years without reading it. And I think when I first saw this in the bookstores, I was going through one of my phases where I wasn't particularly interested in Greek mythology. Kind of like, okay, been there, done that. I've already read a bunch of books on Greek mythology. I don't need to read any more. But then when I got back into it this past couple of years, rereading the Iliad and stuff like that. Plus, my students who are ESL students have to do extensive reading as part of their coursework, and one of them was talking about this book, and I thought, yeah, actually that would be a really good book for me to read, seeing as I'm getting back into Greek mythology, and it's been highly praised. And then, wouldn't you know it, for a couple of years now I've been looking for it, and I couldn't find it anywhere. And I could have sworn that I'd seen this book on the bookshelves in Saigon. I think it had been in the bookstores, and then it just disappeared, which they have a tendency to do. The supply of English books is always limited, and something will be in stock for a while, and then it'll just be gone, which is one of the reasons I end up spending so much money in these book hauls, because if there's something I really want, there's like a scarcity mentality. Like, I've got to get it now before it disappears, even though I'm a slow enough reader that I only get through a handful of books a year. But anyways, been looking for this for a couple of years now, and then it was back in the shelves. Sorry, then it was back in the bookstores. So I saw it. I thought I've been looking for this for a couple of years, and bought it, and hope to get around to it soon. So this was my books haul here, which was close to $100, which is a lot of money for me. Yeah, hopefully it'll be money well spent once I get into these books. I guess the disadvantage of being a slow reader is you buy all these books and then it takes you forever to get around to reading them. But the advantage is, as a slow reader, you do kind of get your money's worth out of a book, especially if you calculate it on a per hour basis. So that's the book haul. Now for the books I'm currently reading, this very heavy Marvel horror Lives Again, and Journey to the West and Getting Things Done. So start with this one here. I read, what did I read? A little over 100 pages in this book, from page 258 to 368, so 110 pages. Now, I don't count comic books towards my weekly page counts, even though this collection included some prose interludes, which go on for a few pages. So, and then back to comics. But then, wait for it, back to the prose interlude again. So, part of me feels like I really should be counting this towards my weekly page count. But just to keep things simple, because this is in a graphic novel collection, I'm just going to count the whole thing as a graphic novel, and none of these pages will count towards my weekly page count. But yeah, this book is so heavy it's difficult to lift up for the camera. I finished off the last one in the Wendigo section, and then moved on next to the Satana. I'm not sure how that's pronounced. Satana, daughter of Satan part. Sorry, that's all in reverse image, isn't it? And most of these stories are in black and white, which I don't particularly mind, except I've mentioned this before in past weeks. Some of these panels are a little bit difficult to read. I don't know what's going on here, but yeah, like some of this here, the art isn't very clear. It's difficult to know what's going on. Where's a good example? Where's a good example? I don't know if this is... I have no idea if this is a problem with the original or if this was... So I'm looking for a good example here of where this book is a little bit hard to read. Yeah, is this going to show up on camera? No, it's not showing up on camera very well, is it? Okay, you'll have to take my word for it. The contrast in the inking and some of the words are a little bit faded, so you have to kind of squint a little bit to make everything out during the black and white sections. It's not that bad, but but it could be better. It's still readable. The Satana, daughter of Satan, is a character I'm not familiar with. Not knowing that Marvel horror from the 70s is something I was not overly familiar with before I got this collection. It's an interesting character. She's portrayed both as the protagonist and as incredibly evil at the same time. Although there are hints that she's on some sort of a path to redemption. I guess we'll have to see how these sections hold out. And yeah, it's exactly what the name sounds like. It's the daughter of Satan. So it is mixing in Christian mythology about Satan and hell and all that stuff, which, I'm not religious these days anymore. I grew up religious, but I'm now an agnostic. But I don't know. It still makes me a little bit queasy kind of reading fiction about hell and stuff like that, because you think to myself, well, you never know. Could be true. And then should we be making light of it, or should I be praying for the protection of my immortal soul? Although generally I figure that the moral culpability for this stuff is on the writer. And I, as a reader, well, I'm just reading it. And besides, as a reader, I don't even know what's coming next. So, I mean, how could I have responsibility for it? I'm just discovering the story as I read it, right? Like, it's not like, it's not like I knew that the story was going to be evil ahead of time. Sorry, but by vocalizing all this, I'm maybe making myself sound a little bit crazier than I actually am. This is stuff that's all in the back of my mind as I read it. It's not something I'm usually overtly thinking about. But I don't know, hang-ups from a religious background or something like that makes me feel a little bit queasy, kind of taking... The whole thing about Satana is she sucks out people's souls and then sends them to hell. Maybe a religious hang-up to me, but the idea of people getting damned to hell seems like something I part of me is a little bit queasy about. But moving on. So the comic book aside, I'm down to 2 regular books, and what I'm going to try to do is limit the books I'm actively reading each week to 2, which means as soon as I knock one of these off, then I'll be able to slot one of these other books into that spot. And at this point, there are a lot of other books I'm eager to read. Now, Journey to the West just goes on and on and on. This is volume 3, and there's volume 4 to read afterwards. So my best bet for knocking a book out quickly is going to be getting it done. So maybe I'll try and focus on this one. This is, as I mentioned, a book I'm reading for professional development. He does have some really good ideas here about organizing, although it's dated. Although, actually, when I was in the bookstore, I mentioned I was in the bookstore this past Friday, there's a new edition of this book out, like a 3rd edition. So, and I could have bought it, but I thought, no, I'll just stick with the one in my library. So maybe it's my fault that I'm reading the older one. But this was published in 2001. So he's talking... The Google Documents revolution is at least a decade off at this point, or 15 years off at this point. No, about a decade, right? So he's talking about all these different organization systems, but my to-do list is all in Google Docs, and you can link things into it, and you can rearrange stuff so easily with word processing and stuff like that. So his system of like physical files or like a physical calendar does seem a little bit dated. I'm sure the new edition is better. He does talk about some electronic organizers, but it's like the Palm Pilot, right? Like really old stuff. But his basic idea for keeping track of all your projects in some sort of organizational system and always having your next actionable item thought out and organized I mean, I think I'm going to start trying to do that on Google Docs. That's all good advice. Then he moves into a next section about projects. Now, I should back up. At the beginning of the book, he said a project is anything you have to do that requires many different steps. So even things like planning a vacation, or like arranging a night out or something like that. So in that sense of the word, I've got a lot of different projects I've got to be working on, both personal and for work. But then in chapter 3, getting projects creatively underway. At this point, it does seem like he's talking almost exclusively to business executives, like how to manage a project at work and clarify everyone's vision. And as like an English teacher, I'm like, okay, this doesn't really apply to me, but it's readable enough. His prose is quite clear. I mean, a lot of this stuff here doesn't seems to apply more to a business executive, but I am getting some stuff from it. So up to page 108 so far in this one. And then Journey to the West. Now, a small digression here. I did actually manage this past week to see a couple of movies. And I'll link to those in the description down below, my videos, my video reviews. I saw Ride on Sunset Strip, which is just a timepiece, cultural oddity. But I also saw the new Indiana Jones movie, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which was kind of a disappointment, although it had its moments. But then I was researching, why it took so long to get the fifth Indiana Jones movie and the various different sequels that were planned or proposed but never got made. And it turns out one of them in the 1980s, I think this was supposed to be a follow-up to Temple of Doom or something like that, was going to be Indiana Jones and the Monkey King. The Monkey King being, of course, the character from Journey to the West. And I guess it kind of makes sense, right? So the first movie was the Ark of the Covenant, so Jewish Christian mythology. Second movie was Indian mythology, kind of, or at least what the Westerners' view of what Indian mythology might be like. So then the third movie could be Chinese mythology. So then you could have the Monkey King, and it didn't get approved for one reason or another. It was too ridiculous or whatever. But what was at one point going to be, I think, the third Indiana Jones movie was Indiana Jones and the Monkey King. So a nice little tie-in here with Indiana Jones and the Journey to the West. I read this week from page 1392, which was chapter 61, up to chapter 65, 1486, still in the middle of chapter 65. And actually, in those pages, a few different episodes have gone by. So the first episode was wrapping up the battle with the Bull King. So they fought a battle with the Bull King, and for whatever reason, everybody gets called out to help the monkey on this one. Like all the different local gods and all the forces of heaven and stuff like that, they're all against the Bull King. And the Bull King, like a lot of episodes in this book, the fight goes through several stages. When they were writing this book, they were in no hurry to finish up, and apparently had no shortage of paper, which always amazes me when you think this was written in the 16th century, before any word processors. That this was just all handwritten by somebody. But yeah, it was... battle goes through many different stages where there's many different transformations. At one point, the bull demon enlarges himself into like this huge giant bull and everyone's fighting against him. But eventually he is subdued. Monkey tells Pig to go back and exterminate the other devils. Monkey does that, and it ends up killing the Jade Fox princess, who had been the concubine or the lover of the bull demon, which struck me as a little bit harsh, that she's just kind of killed off after having been given some personality earlier. This book does that occasionally. The characters can be a little bit callous, although to be fair, it's not nearly as brutal as the Iliad or something like that from Western tradition. And in fact, much of the time, the characters, be they humans or be they demons, are actually converted rather than killed. And perhaps that's because that's the usual pattern. Maybe that's what strikes me about when characters are killed rather callously. That being said, the bull demon himself and his wife, Raksasi, are actually shown mercy and convert to Buddhism. Then they go into another kingdom, and in this kingdom, they meet some monks who are being persecuted, and the monks are being persecuted because there used to be this big treasure in the kingdom that was stolen, and the king has blamed the monks for it. Now the monkey and the pig find out that it was some demons who took it, and the demons actually belong to the Dragon King and one of the Dragon Kings. Now, dragons in this story are always associated with some sort of underwater or aquatic kingdom. I don't know if that was Chinese mythology generally, but that seems to be the way it is in the story. So this dragon who's got all these underwater creatures as part of his kingdom. Now, the other thing that I'm gradually beginning to discover, I mean, this is something that's been true all along in this book, but I think I'm gradually beginning to get my head around it. All these devils are not like devils like in Christian mythology, where they like come from the pits of hell. They're just living beings who acquire powers to transform their spirits. And they can be any sort of living being. So according to this book, any living being can study the way of Taoism or Buddhism and cultivate their senses to acquire these powers. So they can be animals, and they can also be aquatic creatures. So this one, what was it? The demons were like I forget, a catfish, and what was the other one? A catfish and some other one. But they were fish who had become demons, and they were part of the dragon. This particular dragon had been the one that the bull demon had been at the party with in the part I talked about last week. So it's a character that's already been established. And he's got a daughter and a son-in-law, and his son-in-law is like this 9-headed bird creature. Anyways, without getting into all the backs and forth of it, the monkey and the pig end up fighting the Dragon King, his son-in-law, and defeating them and bringing it back the treasure to the king. And there's also I'm skipping a whole bunch of stuff just because I don't feel like recounting every single detail. But after a big long fight, that they win. Also, At one point, this is another episode where they bring in reinforcements. Lord Erlang, who is, again, another heavenly creature from Chinese mythology, he's the one who actually originally defeated Monkey at the beginning of this book, back when Monkey was still fighting his war against heaven. He gets brought down to help him with the fight as well. So in these chapters recently, there's lots of times when reinforcements from heaven are called in. Then the journey continues, and we go into the next episode, which is where they're walking through this mountain, which is completely covered with thorns. So the pig is clearing the thorns with his rake. And then they come across a monastery, a temple, where an elder comes out to offer them cakes and tea, and Monkey knows it's a demon. So Monkey tries to stop him. And then once Monkey attacks, the demon just whisks the monk away. But he takes him to a mountain top or a hillside where there's a bunch of different tree or plant spirits. And they just want to recite poetry with the monk. And so there's a lot of poetry sections here, which I have trouble with a little bit because my eyes tend to gloss over during the poetry scenes. And it's talking about they're in the poems, they're debating the merits of Buddhism versus Taoism. And I can vaguely understand what they're saying, but I don't have a good background in either of them. There are some notes at the back, but not very much. The translator of this edition deliberately decided not to use a lot of notes. And then finally, when we get to the poetry contest, the note just says, "The verbal ingenuity of the verses that follow defies translation. Only the literal meaning has been preserved in these English versions." So but it makes sense. It's difficult to translate poetry into another language, huh? And the monk is having a fun time with them until they try to get him to either have sexual relations with this princess, this fairy princess, or when he won't do that, then they try to get him to marry her. And he calls for help, and he's eventually rescued by his disciples. And as morning comes, Pig goes over, and he sees that these spirits were just plants. They had been plant spirits. So I guess in addition to animals, plants can also become demons if they cultivate their conduct using Taoism or Buddhism. So it was a lone upright cypress tree, juniper, a bamboo one. The red devil was a maple. And the apricot fairy that they were trying to get the monk to marry, was an apricot tree. So the pig just uproots all these trees and breaks them, and the monk tries to stop him, but the pig and the monkey say, "Trust us, this is for the best. We don't want to let them grow into big monsters." Which again struck me as a little bit harsh, especially because we just spent the past chapter conversing with these tree spirits and seeing how learned they were in the philosophies of Taoism, that their fate is just to get uprooted and broken when morning comes. But the book does it. Again, like I said, it's not nearly as bloodthirsty as some books in the Western tradition, like the Iliad. But it does have the sense throughout it that there are evil spirits or devils, and those are kind of like the goblins or the orcs in Tolkien's books. They just need to be destroyed. That's the best thing to do with them. Although, like I said, some of the times they do get converted. Even the evil spirits can get converted to Buddhism. Which, if you open up the possibility for them to be converted to Buddhism, then why do they have to be destroyed sometimes, huh? Oh, well. And then the next chapter is, well, again, another one where the monk gets captured. They're on a different mountain peak this time. And the monkey tries to warn the monk not to go into the temple, but the monk does. So the monkey, the pig, and Friar Sand, the sand spirit, all get captured. And Monkey, when he tries to rescue them, gets captured in these magic symbols which enclose around him. But he asks the local gods to go to heaven for help, and the constellations, like the constellations from the sky, come down, and they do eventually get him out from the symbols, which are to have closed in on him and are trapping him. So Monkey's out of the symbols now, and he needs to, that's as far as I am in chapter 65, and now he needs to go rescue the monk. So, yeah, I mean, I realize that I don't do the best job of retelling this every week. I'm kind of stumbling over it, but maybe you can get a sense in these retellings of what an interesting book this is to read, how imaginative it is, fantastical, like in a good way. But it also, it's several volumes long with small print. So it's part of me is really enjoying it, and part of me wishes it would hurry up and get done so I can read some of the other books on my reading list this year. But what I'm going to do, I think, is prioritize finishing up this book, and then just keep this one on the side, maybe where I try and work in some of these other books in my reading schedule. All right, I have rambled on long enough for 1 week, so I will stop it here. I will see you next week, BookTube.